Lucas Bennett saw her first in the rain. A soldier in desert camouflage, soaked to the bone, standing at the bus stop like a statue forgotten by time. In her arms, wrapped in what looked like a hospital blanket, a baby no bigger than a loaf of bread. The infant's cry cut through the November storm like glass against concrete. But the woman, she couldn't have been older than 25, just stood there, motionless, eyes fixed on nothing. Lucas pulled his pickup to the curb, wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the windshield. His 6-year-old daughter Aria pressed her face to the passenger window, breath fogging the glass. "Daddy, why is that lady just standing there?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because something in the soldier's stillness spoke of a breaking that went deeper than rain or cold or the kind of exhaustion that sleep could fix. The baby's cries grew sharper, more desperate. Lucas killed the engine, rain immediately drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. He'd been a single father for 3 years now, since cancer took Aria's mother, and he knew the sound of a child in need. But this was different. This was a baby crying not just for milk or warmth, but for the kind of safety that only comes from being truly wanted. He stepped out into the storm. "Ma'am." His voice barely carried over the rain. "You okay?" The soldier turned. Her face was angular, beautiful in a carved-from-marble way, but her eyes, Christ, her eyes looked like they'd seen the world end twice. Dark hair plastered to her skull, dog tags catching the streetlight like tiny mirrors. "Bus isn't coming," she said simply. Her voice was steady, controlled. Military training holding her together when everything else had clearly fallen apart. "How long you been standing here?" 2 hours. Maybe 3. The baby coughed, a wet sound. That made Lucas's chest tighten. He looked at the woman again, really looked. Saw the tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with cold. The way she held the infant like she was afraid she might drop something precious. The faded bruise along her jawline that spoke of recent violence. "Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from today. Drop one word describing your mood right now." "You're coming home with me," Lucas said, and the words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. She blinked. "What?" "That baby needs to get out of this rain. You need to get out of this rain." He gestured toward his truck. "I've got a warm house, dry clothes, and more baby formula than any reasonable human should own." The soldier, he could see her nameplate now, Warren, stared at him like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. I can't." "Yes, you can." His voice was gentle but firm. The same tone he used when Aria woke up from nightmares about her mother. "Whatever happened, whatever brought you here, it can wait one more night." Chloe Warren looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at this stranger with kind eyes and calloused hands. A man who'd stopped his whole world just because he'd seen someone breaking apart in the rain. "Why?" she whispered. Lucas thought of his own daughter, warm and safe in the truck. Thought of all the strangers who'd shown them kindness in the dark months after Sarah's death. Thought of the simple truth that sometimes salvation comes disguised as an ordinary Tuesday. "Because someone did the same for me once," he said. "And when the story ends, I hope you'll rate it from 0 to 10. Thunder rolled overhead like a promise, and Chloe Warren took her first step towards something that might, just might, feel like home. The inside of Lucas's truck smelled like coffee and crayons and the faint sweetness of the air freshener Aria had insisted on buying last week. Something called Spring Meadow that smelled nothing like any meadow Lucas had ever encountered. But it was warm and dry and safe. Chloe slid into the passenger seat, baby clutched against her chest like a lifeline. Her boots left puddles on the floor mat, and she mumbled an apology that Lucas waved away. "This is my daughter, Aria," he said, adjusting the rearview mirror so Chloe could see the little girl better. "Aria, this is Miss Warren." "Chloe," the soldier said quietly. Just Chloe. Aria, who had inherited her mother's curiosity and her father's inability to leave well enough alone, leaned forward as far as her car seat would allow. "Is that your baby?" The question hung in the warm air like smoke. Lucas watched Chloe's reflection in the passenger window, saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers instinctively curled tighter around the infant. "It's complicated," Chloe said finally. Lucas caught her eye in the mirror. "Complicated's okay. We do complicated real well in this family." They drove through rain-slicked streets lined with houses glowing yellow against the storm. Lucas's neighborhood wasn't fancy, ranch-style homes with chain-link fences and pickup trucks in driveways. But it was solid. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names and still brought casseroles when someone got sick. "You live here long?" Chloe asked, voice carefully neutral. 15 years. Bought the house right after I got back from my first deployment. Her head snapped toward him. "You served?" "Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan." He pulled into a driveway. Beside a modest brick house with white shutters and a front porch that sagged slightly on the left side. "You, Marines. Just got back from Syria 3 weeks ago." The baby stirred in her arms, making the soft snuffling sounds newborns make when they're searching for something they can't quite name. Chloe looked down at the tiny face, and Lucas saw something crack in her expression. Not break, crack. Like ice on a pond when spring finally comes. "How old?" he asked gently. 5 days. 5 days. Jesus. Lucas had questions, about 1,000 of them. But he'd learned enough about trauma to know that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was simply hold space for someone else's silence. They sat in the driveway. Engine ticking as it cooled. Rain drumming against the roof like a lullaby written by angels who'd forgotten how to sing. In the back seat, Arya had gone quiet, the way children do when they sense the adults around them are navigating dangerous waters. "I don't know what I'm doing," Chloe whispered, and the admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "Nobody does," Lucas said. "That's the secret they don't tell you about being a parent. We're all just making it up as we go along and hoping we don't screw it up too badly." She almost smiled at that. Almost. The front door of the house opened, and an elderly woman appeared on the porch. Mrs. Eleanor Bishop from next door, holding an umbrella and wearing the kind of concerned expression that had been watching over this neighborhood for the better part of 60 years. "That's Mrs. Bishop," Lucas explained, seeing Chloe tense. "She's harmless. Mostly. Lucas Bennett, you get those babies out of that rain right this instant," Mrs. Bishop called, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 5 children and outlived 2 husbands. "Yes, ma'am," Lucas called back, and he was already moving, opening doors, gathering diaper bags and car seats, and all the small, necessary things that keep children safe in an uncertain world. Chloe emerged from the truck like someone stepping onto foreign soil. Uncertain, ready to run. But when the baby started crying again, that thin, desperate sound that cuts straight through to the bone, she straightened her shoulders and followed Lucas toward the house. Mrs. Bishop met them at the bottom of the porch steps, umbrella extended like a shelter. "Well," she said, looking Chloe up and down with the practiced eye of someone who'd been assessing people's needs for decades. "Aren't you a sight for sore eyes? Come on, honey, let's get you warm." And Chloe Warren, who had survived firefights and roadside bombs and the kind of loss that leaves permanent scars on the soul, found herself crying for the first time in months. Not because she was sad, but because, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. The baby's cries softened as they stepped onto the porch, as if even she could sense the change in the air. From chaos to calm, from storm to shelter, from lost to found, Lucas's living room looked like a tornado had blown through a toy store and decided to stay for dinner. Action figures sprawled across the coffee table, picture books stacked in crooked towers, and a half-finished puzzle of a unicorn covered most of the floor. But it was warm and lived in and real in a way that made Chloe's chest ache with something she couldn't quite name. "Sorry about the mess," Lucas said, clearing a space on the couch with practiced efficiency. Aria's got this theory that toys work better when they're spread out. "It's not mess," Chloe said softly, settling into the cushions with the baby still pressed against her chest. "It's life." Mrs. Bishop had followed them inside, moving through Lucas's kitchen like she'd been doing it for years. Which, Chloe realized, she probably had. The older woman emerged with a steaming mug of tea and a plate of sandwiches cut into perfect triangles. "You eat," Mrs. Bishop commanded, setting the food on the coffee table. "Both of you. And don't give me any arguments about not being hungry. I've been watching people fall apart and put themselves back together for 73 years, and I know the signs." Chloe accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping her hands around the mug like it was an anchor. The warmth seeped through her fingers, chasing away a cold that had nothing to do with the November rain. "Now," Mrs. Bishop continued, settling into the recliner with the air of someone prepared to wait as long as necessary for answers. What's the story with this little angel? The baby had finally stopped crying, lulled by the warmth and the steady rhythm of Chloe's heartbeat. Tiny fingers curled against the hospital blanket, impossibly small and perfect and terrifying in their trust. Her name is Stella, Chloe said, and Lucas noticed the way she said it, like she was testing the weight of the words. Stella Vaughn. Pretty name, Arya said from her spot on the floor, where she was carefully rebuilding the unicorn puzzle. Like the stars. Yeah, Chloe whispered. Like the stars. But there was something in her voice, a crack, a hesitation, that made Lucas lean forward slightly. He'd spent enough time around soldiers to recognize the sound of a story with missing pieces. She yours? Mrs. Bishop asked, and the question was gentle but direct. No judgment, just the kind of practical curiosity that came from a lifetime of helping people sort through their troubles. Chloe was quiet for so long that Lucas thought she might not answer. Then, my sisters. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples through the comfortable silence. Chloe corrected herself, voice barely above a whisper. My sister's baby. Stella was my sister's baby. Understanding hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. The past tense. The hospital blanket. The way Chloe held the infant like she was carrying something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Oh, honey, Mrs. Bishop breathed, and her voice carried the weight of 1,000 small tragedies witnessed and survived. Car accident. Chloe continued, staring down at Stella's sleeping face. Drunk driver ran a red light. Peyton was 8 months pregnant, on her way to her baby shower. They did an emergency C-section, but she never, her voice broke. Actually broke, like glass hitting concrete. Lucas felt Arya's eyes on him from across the room, wide and worried in the way children get when they sense the adults are talking about things too big and sad for small people to understand. He met her gaze and nodded slightly, a promise that they'd talk about this later, when little ears weren't listening. I was supposed to be there, Chloe whispered, at the shower, but I was halfway around the world, carrying a rifle and pretending I could protect people when I couldn't even protect my own sister. The baby stirred, making soft cooing sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. Chloe's hand moved automatically to soothe her, and Lucas saw the way her shoulders curved protectively around the infant. Instinct, maybe, or love that. Had nowhere else to go. Social services called me, she continued. Said there was no father listed on the birth certificate, no other family. Said if I didn't come get her, she'd go into the system. So you came, Lucas said, and it wasn't a question. I came. Chloe looked up at him, and he saw the fear there, raw and honest and sharp enough to cut. But I don't know how to take care of a baby. I know how to field strip a rifle and treat a gunshot wound and survive on 3 hours of sleep for 2 weeks straight. But I don't know anything about bottles or diapers or why she cries for 20 minutes every night at exactly the same time. Colic, Mrs. Bishop said matter-of-factly. Probably. Most babies get it. Doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Drop a comment and tell us. What's the bravest thing you've ever had to do? Feels like I'm doing everything wrong, Chloe admitted. I've been staying in a hotel room for 5 days, and she cries. All the time. Like she knows I'm not who she's supposed to have. The room fell silent except for the rain against the windows and the soft sound of Stella's breathing. Then Arya's voice, clear and sure from her spot on the floor. Maybe she's crying because she misses her mommy. I cried a lot when my mommy went to heaven. And in that moment, with the wisdom that only children possess, a 6-year-old girl named Arya had just handed them the key to understanding why some storms never seem to end. They just need someone brave enough to weather them. The middle of the night arrived like an unwelcome visitor, bringing with it the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel enormous. Chloe sat on the edge of the guest bed in Lucas's spare room, watching Stella sleep in the portable crib that Mrs. Bishop had somehow conjured from her seemingly endless supply of helpful things. For the first time in 5 days, the baby was peaceful. Really peaceful. Not the exhausted collapse that came after hours of crying, but actual rest. Her tiny chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm. One small fist curled against her cheek, like she was holding on to a secret that a soft knock interrupted. Chloe's vigil. Lucas appeared in the doorway, hair rumpled from sleep, holding 2 mugs of something that smelled like hot chocolate and comfort. Couldn't sleep either, he asked quietly. Afraid if I close my eyes, she'll disappear, Chloe admitted, accepting the mug gratefully. Like maybe this is all just some elaborate dream my brain cooked up to avoid dealing with reality. Lucas settled into the rocking chair beside the crib, the same chair where he'd spent countless nights with Arya during those first terrible months after Sarah's death. Back when grief felt like drowning in slow motion and every breath was a conscious choice. Reality's overrated anyway, he said, watching Stella's sleeping face. You want to talk about it? About what? About why you were standing at that bus stop instead of going home. Chloe was quiet for so long that Lucas thought she might not answer. Then, I don't have a home. Not anymore. She cradled the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. She was everything good about our family. The one who remembered birthdays and sent Christmas cards and called our grandmother every Sunday. After our parents died in a helicopter crash when I was 17, she basically raised me. Put herself through nursing school while making sure I graduated high school and got into the Marines. Sounds like a hell of a sister. The best. Chloe's voice caught, and I was never around. Always deployed, always chasing the next mission. Always telling myself I was serving something bigger than myself. But really? I was just running. From what? From having to be the kind of person who stays, who builds things instead of just protecting them. She looked down at Stella, who had shifted slightly in her sleep, tiny lips making sucking motions like she was dreaming of milk and safety. Peyton used to joke that I collected scars instead of memories. Said I'd rather bleed for strangers than cry for family. Lucas nodded slowly. He understood that kind of running. Had done plenty of it himself after Sarah's diagnosis, throwing himself into work and deployment preparations and anything that didn't require him to sit still with his own fear. She was pregnant when I left for Syria, Chloe continued. 8 weeks along, scared out of her mind because the father had bailed the second he found out. But she was also, God, she was so happy. Started texting me pictures of baby clothes and cribs and all these books about child development. You didn't want to come back. I wanted to. The admission seemed to surprise her. For the first time in my adult life, I actually wanted to be somewhere other than a war zone. But we were in the middle of this operation, and I couldn't just leave my unit, and I kept telling myself I'd be back in time for the birth. She pulled something from her pocket, a worn photograph of two women who looked enough alike to obviously be sisters, but different enough that you could tell who was the protector and who was the protected. Peyton's smile was radiant, one hand resting on a visible baby bump. Chloe stood slightly behind her, in full dress uniform, looking proud and scared and already halfway gone. This was taken at Christmas, last time I saw her alive. Lucas studied the photo, seeing the love there, but also the distance. The way Chloe's posture suggested someone who'd learned not to get too comfortable anywhere. I got the call about the accident while we were on patrol, she continued. Middle of nowhere, middle of a firefight, and my commanding officer pulls me aside to tell me my sister was dead and I had a niece I'd never met. Jesus. They flew me back for emergency leave. Compassionate assignment, they called it. But by the time I got to the hospital, Peyton was already, and Stella was in the NICU, this tiny little thing hooked up to machines, and the social worker was asking me questions I didn't know how to answer. She set down the mug and reached into the crib, not quite touching Stella but hovering her hand just above the baby's chest, as if she could protect her through proximity alone. I signed the papers, she whispered. Became her legal guardian. Without really understanding what that meant. Thought I'd figure it out, you know? Thought maybe maternal instinct would kick in or something. And I've been failing her for 5 days straight. Chloe's voice cracked. She cries when I hold her. Won't take a bottle unless I practically force it. It's like she knows I'm not qualified for this. Lucas leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You want to know what I think? Not really. But tell me anyway. I think she's not crying because you're doing something wrong. I think she's crying because she's grieving too. Chloe looked up at him, startled. Babies know more than we give them credit for, he continued. They know when the world feels different, when the voice that sang to them for 9 months isn't there anymore. She's not rejecting you, Chloe. She's mourning. How do you mourn someone you never really knew? Same way you love someone you've never really known, Lucas said quietly. With your whole heart and no idea what you're doing. Thunder rolled overhead, softer now, like the storm was finally beginning to move on. In the crib, Stella stirred, making the soft whimpering sounds that usually preceded a full-scale meltdown. But this time, Chloe didn't freeze. She reached down and lifted the baby carefully, settling her against her chest with movements that were becoming less awkward and more instinctive with each repetition. "Hey there, little star," she whispered, and her voice was different now. "Steadier. I know this is all new and scary, but we're going to figure it out together, okay?" And for the first time since she'd taken that phone call in the middle of a Syrian desert, Chloe Warren began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she might actually be enough, even if she had no idea what she was doing. Even if love felt like stumbling through the dark towards something you couldn't quite see but desperately hoped was there. The baby's cries softened, then stopped altogether. And in the quiet that followed, something shifted. Not fixed, not yet, but shifted, like tectonic plates finding a new place to rest. The call came at 3:47 in the morning, 3 days after Chloe had moved into Lucas's guest room with nothing but a diaper bag and more grief than one person should have to carry. Lucas found her in the kitchen, pacing the length of the small space with Stella crying inconsolably in her arms and her phone pressed to her ear with white-knuckled intensity. "No, you listen to me," she was saying, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I have custody papers. Legal, notarized custody papers." Lucas stepped closer, close enough to hear the tinny voice on the other end of the line. Official. Cold. The kind of bureaucratic authority that could destroy lives with rubber stamps and filing deadlines. "Ms. Warren, we understand you have temporary emergency custody, but our investigation has raised some concerns about your ability to provide stable care for the infant." "What investigation?" Chloe's voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" "You're currently unemployed, living in someone else's home with no permanent address. You have no childcare experience and no support system. The hotel incident." "What hotel incident?" "Security footage shows you leaving the child unattended in a hotel room for several hours while you—" "I was buying formula." Chloe's voice rose to nearly a shout, and Stella's cries intensified in response. "The baby was sleeping, and I ran to the pharmacy across the street for 10 minutes. Lucas gently touched her shoulder, a silent offer of support. She looked at him with eyes that had gone wild with fear, the same look he'd seen on soldiers' faces when they realized the ground beneath them wasn't as solid as they'd thought. "Ms. Warren, we need you to bring the child to our office first thing Monday morning. We have a family lined up, stable, experienced, financially secure." "This is what's best for—" Chloe hung up, actually threw the phone across the kitchen, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor in pieces. "They want to take her," she whispered, and the words came out broken. "They want to take her away." Stella was screaming now, that particular pitch that newborns achieve when the entire world feels like it's ending. Chloe stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, holding the baby, but looking like she might shatter at any moment. "Give her to me," Lucas said quietly. "What? The baby?" "Give her to me for a minute." Chloe hesitated, then reluctantly transferred Stella to Lucas's arms. He'd forgotten how light newborns were, how their entire existence seemed to depend on the steadiness of the person holding them. He began the slow, rhythmic bounce that he remembered from Aria's infancy, the one that worked better than any lullaby. "Now, sit," he told Chloe, "and breathe." She sat at the kitchen table, head in her hands. "I can't lose her, Lucas. She's all I have left of Peyton. She's all I have left of anything." "You're not going to lose her." "You heard them. They have a family lined up. Stable people with money and experience, and probably a white picket fence and a golden retriever." Her voice was bitter, defeated. "What do I have? PTSD from 2 combat deployments, a hotel room I can't afford, and absolutely no idea how to be a mother." Lucas continued bouncing Stella, who was finally beginning to calm down. "You have love. Real, messy, imperfect love. And sometimes that's the only qualification that matters. Tell that to social services." "I will." Chloe looked up at him. "What?" "Monday morning, when you go to their office, I'm going with you. As a character witness. As someone who's seen you with Stella for the past 3 days and watched you learn to be exactly what she needs." "Lucas, you barely know me." "I know enough." He settled into the chair across from her, Stella now peaceful. In his arms. "I know you stood in the rain for 3 hours rather than abandon a baby who needed you. I know you've been getting up every 2 hours for 5 days straight to feed her, even though you're running on fumes and grief. I know you talk to her like she's a person instead of just a problem to solve. Chloe wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It won't matter. They'll take one look at my military record, my lack of income, the fact that I'm living in someone else's house. Then we'll fix those things. How? Lucas was quiet for a moment, thinking. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to creep across the sky, painting the kitchen in soft gray light. Somewhere in the distance, Mrs. Bishop's rooster was beginning his morning announcements. You need a job? He asked finally. I need a lot of things. Jackson Rivers owns the construction company I work for. Good man, fair employer, understands what it means to hire veterans. I could make a call. I don't know anything about construction. You know how to follow orders, work as part of a team, and solve problems under pressure. That's 90% of the job right there. Chloe stared at him. Why would you do that? Because 3 years ago, when Sarah was dying and I was falling apart, this whole neighborhood showed up. Mrs. Bishop brought dinner every night for 2 months. Jackson gave me flexible hours so I could be at the hospital. The guy who runs the hardware store let me bring Aria to work when I couldn't find a babysitter. He looked down at Stella, who had fallen asleep in his arms with the complete trust that only babies possessed. People helped me when I needed it most, he continued. And now I get to help you. That's how it works. That's how we all survive. The kitchen fell quiet except for the soft sound of Stella's breathing and the distant hum of traffic as the world began to wake up. Chloe sat perfectly still, as if movement might break whatever spell was holding this moment together. What if it's not enough? She whispered. What if I get a job and an apartment and do everything right, and they still decide I'm not good enough? Lucas met her eyes. Then we fight. All of us. Because Stella belongs with someone who loves her, not someone who just looks good on paper. You really believe that? I believe that love is the only thing that matters in the end. Everything else, money, stability, experience, that's all just window dressing. But love, real love, that's what builds a family. Outside, Mrs. Bishop's back door opened, and they could hear her talking to her cats and the patient, affectionate tone she used for all creatures who depended on her kindness. She's going to be okay, Lucas said, and he wasn't sure if he was talking about Stella or Chloe or all of them together. We're all going to be okay. But even as he said it, he could see the doubt in Chloe's eyes, the fear that love might not be enough, that sometimes the system won, and good people lost the things that mattered most, and all the hoping in the world couldn't change the way the scales were weighted. Monday was 2 days away. 2 days to build a case for keeping a family together that had only just begun to understand what it meant to be 1.2 days to prove that home wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, even when you had no idea what you were doing, especially. Then, Sunday evening found them in Lucas's living room, surrounded by papers scattered across the coffee table like battlefield maps. Employment applications, character references, apartment listings circled in red ink, the bureaucratic arsenal they hoped would be enough to convince a room full of strangers that love was a qualification worth considering. Chloe sat cross-legged on the floor, feeding Stella while simultaneously trying to fill out her third job application of the day. Her handwriting was getting progressively worse as exhaustion set in, but she pressed on with the determined focus of someone who'd learned to complete missions no matter how impossible they seemed. Income from last 3 years, she read aloud. Well, that's going to be interesting. Military deployment, currently unemployed because I'm trying to raise my dead sister's baby. Don't write that last part, Aria advised. From her spot at the kitchen table, where she was working on a crayon drawing with the serious concentration of a master artist. Right between opportunities. Lucas looked up from his laptop, where he'd been researching child custody laws for the past 4 hours. Where did you learn that phrase? Mrs. Bishop. She says that's what grown-ups call it when they don't have a job but don't want to sound sad about it. Chloe laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in days. Your daughter's going to run a corporation someday. She's already running this household, Lucas replied, and it was true. Aria had appointed herself official baby whisperer, diaper fetcher, and general supervisor of all things Stella-related. She took her responsibilities seriously, treating the baby like a fascinating puzzle that required careful study and frequent reports. The front door opened without a knock. which meant it was either Mrs. Bishop or someone with a very specific death wish. Mrs. Bishop appeared in the doorway carrying a casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone who'd been watching developments from her kitchen window and had finally decided to intervene. "How's our war planning going?" she asked, settling the dish on the counter. "Terrible," Chloe said honestly. "I have no money, no permanent address, no childcare experience, and no idea what I'm going to say to these people tomorrow that won't make them immediately take Stella away from me." Mrs. Bishop studied her for a moment, then disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "What's that?" Lucas asked. "Character references," she said. Simply, "I made some calls." She spread the contents across the coffee table. Letters. Dozens of them. From people Chloe had never heard of. "This one's from Pastor Williams at the Methodist Church," Mrs. Bishop explained, pointing to a sheet of church letterhead. "He's never met you, but he's seen you through my kitchen window for the past 3 days. And he says any woman who walks the floor at midnight to comfort a crying baby has the heart of a natural mother." Chloe stared at the letter, vision blurring slightly. "This one's from Dr. Sarah Chun at the pediatric clinic," Mrs. Bishop continued. "She says she'll provide free well baby care for Stella because she believes children belong with family who love them, not strangers who just happen to have better paperwork." More letters. The pharmacist who'd watched Chloe carefully read medication labels and ask questions about infant care. The cashier at the grocery store who'd seen her comparison shopping for baby formula while trying to make $20 stretch as far as possible. The librarian who'd observed her checking out every parenting book they had, then returning the next day to check out more. "How did you?" Chloe began. "Honey, I've lived in this neighborhood for 60 years. I know everyone, and everyone knows me. More importantly, everyone knows what it looks like when good people need help." Lucas picked up one of the letters, scanning the contents. "This is from Jackson Rivers. Says he's offering you a job as administrative assistant with flexible hours and on-site childcare." "What?" Chloe looked up from Stella, startled. "Seems Lucas made that phone call after all," Mrs. Bishop said, shooting him a knowing look. "And Jackson's wife happens to run a licensed daycare out of their office building. Funny how things work out." Before anyone could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time it was someone they weren't expecting. A woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a briefcase, wearing the sort of practical clothing that suggested she spent her days dealing with people in crisis. "Ms. Warren? I'm Nora Bishop, Eleanor's granddaughter. I'm a family lawyer, and I understand you could use some legal representation tomorrow." Chloe blinked. "I can't afford a lawyer. Good thing I work pro bono for cases involving military families," Nora replied, settling her briefcase on the table. "Now, let's talk about how we're going to win this thing." The next hour passed in a blur of legal strategy and practical advice. Nora explained their rights, outlined what to expect during the meeting, and helped them organize their evidence into something that looked less like desperate scrambling and more like a coherent plan. "The key," Nora explained, spreading legal documents across the table, "is to show them that stability isn't just about money or perfect circumstances. It's about commitment, support systems, and the best interests of the child." She looked directly at Chloe. "They're going to try to paint you as an unstable single woman with no resources. We're going to show them a decorated veteran with a community rallying around her and a clear plan for Stella's future." "What if they don't buy it?" Chloe asked. "Then we appeal. And we keep appealing until we find someone who understands that bureaucracy should serve families, not break them apart." As the evening wore on, something remarkable happened. The scattered papers began to form a story, not just of need, but of hope. Job offer letters, housing applications, childcare arrangements, character references from people who'd known Chloe for less than a week, but had seen enough to matter. "You know what I think?" Arya said suddenly from her spot on the floor, where she'd been quietly working on her drawing. "I think Stella picked you." Everyone turned to look at her. "Pick me for what?" Chloe asked gently. "To be her mom. Like, maybe her real mom couldn't stay, but she made sure you would find her. Like a treasure map, but for families." The room went very quiet. Chloe looked down at Stella, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. "You really think so?" Chloe whispered. "Definitely," Arya said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. She stopped crying when you learned how to hold her right. That means she trusts you. Mrs. Bishop wiped her eyes with a dish towel. Out of the mouths of babes. Later, after the lawyers and casseroles and legal strategies had been cleared away, Chloe sat alone in the guest room with Stella sleeping against her chest. Tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't sure how to answer and decisions that weren't hers to make. But tonight, in this borrowed room, in this borrowed life, she allowed herself to hope, not because everything would be perfect, not because love was always enough, but because sometimes, when you're drowning, the universe sends you exactly the right people to throw you a rope. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you discover that what you thought was rescue was actually just the beginning of coming home. The social services office smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Chloe sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time she shifted, Stella sleeping in the car seat at her feet, while around her the machinery of bureaucracy hummed with efficient indifference. Lucas sat beside her, wearing his one good shirt, and the kind of quiet determination that had gotten him through 2 deployments and 3 years of single parenthood. Across the room, Nora Bishop shuffled through legal documents with the confidence of someone who'd spent her career fighting for families that didn't look perfect on paper. Ms. Warren, a woman in a gray pantsuit, appeared in the doorway. I'm Caleb Chandler, case supervisor. If you'll come with me? The conference room was sterile white with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly sick. Around the table sat 5 people whose job it was to decide whether love was enough to keep a family together. Let's begin, Caleb said, opening a file thick enough to contain Chloe's entire life story. Ms. Warren, we've reviewed your application for permanent custody of Stella Vaughn, and we have some concerns. Chloe's hands tightened in her lap. What kind of concerns? Your employment history shows significant gaps due to military deployment. Your current housing situation is unstable. You have no prior childcare experience and no immediate family support system. She has a support system, Lucas said quietly. She has us. Caleb barely glanced at him. Mr. Bennett, while we appreciate your friendship with Ms. Warren, temporary assistance from neighbors isn't the same as institutional stability. With respect, Nora interjected. My client has secured employment with Rivers Construction, conditional housing approval for a 2-bedroom apartment, and character references from multiple community members. She's also completed parenting classes and has regular pediatric care established for the child. All within the past week, Caleb noted, which suggests these arrangements are reactive rather than planned. Chloe felt the familiar taste of panic rising in her throat. Everything they'd built, every letter and job application and sleepless night of preparation, was being dismissed as too little, too late. May I say something? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Caleb nodded. You're right, Chloe began. I didn't plan for this. I was halfway around the world when my sister died, and I came back to find myself responsible for a baby I'd never held. I had no idea what I was doing. She looked down at Stella, who had woken up and was staring at her with those impossibly dark eyes that seemed to see everything. I still don't know what I'm doing most of the time, she continued. I make bottles at 3 in the morning and Google whether babies are supposed to hiccup that much. I've called the pediatrician's emergency line twice because I was convinced something was wrong, and both times it turned out to be completely normal newborn behavior. A few of the panel members exchanged glances. But here's what I do know, Chloe said, lifting Stella from the car seat. I know that when she cries, she prefers to be held facing outward so she can see what's happening around her. I know that she likes it when I sing off-key lullabies that my sister used to sing to me. I know that she sleeps better when I read to her from the newspaper, and that she makes this little snuffling sound when she's dreaming. She stood up, holding Stella against her chest. I know that every time I look at her, I see my sister's eyes and my sister's stubborn chin. I know that Peyton wanted this baby more than anything in the world, and that she'd trust me to love her the way she would have. Her voice broke slightly, and I know that maybe traditional stability means having everything figured out before you start. But real stability? Real stability means showing up every day and choosing to love someone even when you're terrified. You're not enough. The room was silent except for the soft sound Stella was making as she settled against Chloe's shoulder. Ms. Warren, said another panel member, an older woman with kind eyes. The family we've selected for placement has extensive childcare experience, significant financial resources, and a stable 2-parent household. I'm sure they do, Chloe replied. And I'm sure they're wonderful people who would love Stella and give her opportunities one might not be able to provide. She paused, gathering her courage. But they didn't know Peyton. They didn't grow up hearing stories about our grandmothers, garden, or our father's terrible dad jokes. They won't be able to tell Stella that she gets her stubborn streak from 3 generations of Warren women, or that her mother used to dance in the kitchen while she cooked. Tell us in the comments, what's worth fighting for in your life? They can give her a perfect life, Chloe continued, but I can give her the life her mother wanted her to have. The life that includes bedtime stories about the aunt who loved her before she was born and the community that helped raise her. Lucas stood up beside her. If I may, he said, I've watched Ms. Warren with Stella for the past week. I've seen her get up every 2 hours to feed her, learn to change diapers by watching YouTube videos, and spend her last $20 on organic baby formula because she read somewhere it was better for digestion. He looked around the room. I've also seen her sing Stella to sleep at midnight, research every milestone and developmental marker she could find, and call the pediatrician not because she was panicking, but because she wanted to be sure she was doing everything right. Mr. Bennett, Caleb interrupted, emotional attachment isn't the only factor we consider. Then consider this. Mrs. Bishop's voice cut through the room as she appeared in the doorway, flanked by what looked like half the neighborhood. Consider that this young woman has earned the respect and support of an entire community in less than a week. Behind her stood Pastor Williams, Dr. Chun, Jackson Rivers, the pharmacist, the librarian, and at least a dozen other people who'd taken time off work to show up for a woman and baby they barely knew. Consider, Mrs. Bishop continued, marching into the room with the authority of someone who'd been fighting for lost causes since before most of these bureaucrats were born. That love isn't measured in bank accounts or perfect circumstances. It's measured in who shows up when things get hard. The panel members looked around at the crowd that had somehow materialized in their sterile conference room, bringing with them the scent of coffee and determination and the kind of messy human hope that didn't fit neatly into official forms. We all came here to say the same thing, Jackson Rivers added. This woman and this baby belong together. And if you try to separate them, you'll have to go through all of us first. Caleb looked overwhelmed. This is highly irregular. So is love. Aria's voice piped up from somewhere in the crowd. She'd apparently snuck in with the adults, and now she pushed her way to the front, holding a crayon drawing in her small hands. This is for the baby, she announced, climbing onto a chair so she could see over the table. It's a picture of her new family. The drawing showed stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. A tall figure labeled Chloe, a smaller one labeled Stella, and in the corner, a whole row of figures labeled everyone who loves them. See, Aria explained with the patient tone children use when adults are being particularly slow. She's not just getting one mom. She's getting all of us. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Stella, who had been quiet throughout the entire proceeding, let out a soft coo that somehow sounded like agreement. Caleb looked at his panel, then at the crowd, then at Chloe holding Stella like she was cradling the most precious thing in the world. We'll need to schedule follow-up visits, he said finally. Monthly for the first year, then quarterly. Chloe's knees nearly buckled. Does that mean? That means, Ms. Warren, that sometimes the most stable thing you can give a child is a family that chooses to love her every single day. The room erupted in cheers and tears, and the kind of joyful chaos that happens when good people win against impossible odds. Chloe sank into her chair, holding Stella close, while around her the community that had claimed them both celebrated a victory that belonged to all of them. Lucas knelt beside her chair. How does it feel? He asked quietly. Chloe looked down at Stella, then up at the crowd of people who'd shown up to fight for them, then at the man who'd pulled over in the rain and changed everything. Like coming home, she whispered, and for the first time since she was 17 years old, Chloe Warren understood what that really meant. 6 months later, Chloe stood in the doorway of Stella's nursery, watching morning light filter through curtains that Mrs. Bishop had sewn by hand. The room smelled like baby powder and the lavender sachets that Aria had insisted would help Stella sleep better, and everything was exactly the right kind of imperfect. The crib was a hand-me-down from Jackson's wife, painted white, but showing gentle wear from 3 previous babies. The changing table was something Lucas had built in his garage, complete with safety rails and a small shelf for books. The rocking chair had belonged to Peyton, the one piece of furniture Chloe had been able to salvage from her sister's apartment, and it still smelled faintly of the vanilla perfume Peyton used to wear. Stella was 6 months old now, sitting up with determination and grabbing everything within reach with the focused intensity of someone discovering that the world was full of interesting things to explore. She'd grown into her features, developing chubby cheeks and a smile that could stop traffic. More importantly, she'd grown into being Chloe's daughter in all the ways that mattered. "Morning, little star," Chloe whispered, lifting Stella from the crib. "Ready for another adventure?" The adventure in question was their daily walk to the coffee shop downtown, where Stella had become something of a local celebrity. The baristas knew her order, bottle warmed to exactly the right temperature. The regulars saved the corner table by the window, and the owner had installed a small play area specifically because watching Stella discover toys had become the highlight of everyone's morning. But first, breakfast. Chloe had gotten good at the one-handed cooking required for single motherhood, and she'd learned to time everything around Stella's schedule with military precision. Bottles prepared in advance, coffee programmed to brew automatically, outfit changes strategically placed throughout the apartment for the inevitable moments when babies decided that wearing food was more fun than eating it. "What do you think, Stella?" Chloe asked, settling her into the high chair that Arya had decorated with rainbow stickers. "Oatmeal or the fancy organic stuff that costs more than my boots?" Stella babbled something that sounded like an opinion, reaching for the spoon with hands that had finally figured out how to grab things intentionally. She was beautiful, not just because all babies were beautiful, but because she was becoming herself. Curious like Peyton had been, stubborn like all the Warren women, and gentle in a way that suggested she'd inherited the best parts of everyone who loved her. The apartment was small but comfortable, a two-bedroom place 3 blocks from Lucas's house and 5 minutes from the construction office where Chloe worked. She discovered she had a talent for project management, probably developed through years of military logistics, and Jackson had already hinted at a promotion that would come with benefits and the kind of stability that social workers appreciated. But the real stability was harder to measure and impossible to quantify. It lived in the way Mrs. Bishop still brought dinner twice a week, insisting that new mothers needed looking after, in the way Arya had appointed herself Stella's big sister and took her responsibilities seriously, creating elaborate games that involved teaching a 6-month-old baby the finer points of block stacking and crayon selection. That IT lived in the way. Lucas showed up, not because he had to, not because anyone expected it, but because somewhere between that first rainy night and now, they'd become something that didn't have an official name but felt like family anyway. "Knock, knock." Lucas's voice called from the front door, followed by the sound of keys and footsteps. He'd started letting himself in months ago, after the third time Chloe had fallen asleep in the rocking chair, and he'd had to wake her up to remind her to eat actual food. "In here," she called back, wiping oatmeal off Stella's chin. "Someone's discovered that throwing food is more entertaining than eating it." Lucas appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still damp from his morning shower, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been looking forward to this part of his day. "Morning, troublemaker," he said to Stella, who immediately reached for him with sticky hands and a grin that suggested she'd been waiting for him specifically. "And morning to you too," he added to Chloe, leaning down to kiss her forehead in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. They'd been dancing around the obvious for months now. The way he stayed later every evening, helping with bedtime routines and bottle preparation. The way she'd started keeping his favorite coffee in her kitchen and leaving space in her schedule for the conversations that stretched long past Stella's bedtime. The way Arya had started referring to them as a unit and drawing pictures that showed all 4 of them together. "How'd the job site visit go yesterday?" Chloe asked, settling beside him at the small kitchen table while Stella practiced her newfound ability to bang a spoon against her high chair tray. "Good. Really good, actually." Lucas smiled. "Jackson's bidding on a new housing development, and he wants me to supervise the whole project. More responsibility, better pay, and it would position us for the partnership we've been talking about." "Lucas, that's amazing." "Yeah. Well, Turns out having someone who understands both construction and logistics makes for pretty effective project management. Wonder where I learned that. She bumped his shoulder with hers. Probably from hanging around the right people. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Stella explore the fascinating properties of oatmeal while the morning light painted everything golden. This was Chloe's favorite time of day, before the world demanded their attention, when it was just the three of them and the small miracle of ordinary happiness. Can I ask you something? Lucas said quietly. Always. Are you happy? Really happy, not just grateful things worked out happy. Chloe considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, happiness had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd been so focused on survival, keeping Stella, finding work, proving herself worthy. That joy had felt like something that happened to other people. But now, watching Stella attempt to feed herself while wearing more breakfast than she was eating, listening to Lucas hum under his breath while he read construction reports, she realized that happiness had snuck up on her. Not the dramatic, movie soundtrack kind, but the quiet, sustainable kind that lived in Tuesday mornings and shared coffee and the sound of a baby's laughter. Yeah, she said softly. I really am. Good, Lucas replied. Because I have something I want to ask you. Before she could respond, Arya burst through the front door with the enthusiasm of someone who discovered something extraordinary. Guess what? She announced, practically vibrating with excitement. Mrs. Bishop says there might be a shooting star tonight, and I think we should all watch it together because Stella's probably never seen one. And also I made a list of wishes just in case. She produced a piece of paper covered in crayon scribbles and very serious handwriting. What kind of wishes? Chloe asked, accepting the list. Important ones, like world peace and unlimited ice cream, and for grown-ups to remember that bedtime stories work better with voices, not just reading. Lucas laughed. Those are good wishes. And one more, Arya said, suddenly shy. But it's a secret. What kind of secret? Chloe pressed gently. Arya glanced between her father and Chloe, then at Stella, who was watching the conversation with the intense focus of someone who understood more than anyone gave her credit for. I wish that we could all be a real family, she whispered. Like, official, with papers and everything. The kitchen went very quiet. Chloe felt her breath catch, while beside her Lucas went perfectly still. Arya, he said carefully, that's not really how wishes work. Actually, Chloe interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. I think that might be exactly how wishes work. She looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and saw everything she'd been too scared to hope for reflected in his eyes. Love, yes, but also commitment. Partnership. The promise of building something together that would last longer than the crisis that had brought them together. Is that what you wanted to ask me? She said softly. Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. Among other things. What other things? Whether you'd be interested in making this official. All of it. The family part, the partnership part, the growing old together part. Stella chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, as if she approved of the direction the conversation was taking. Arya was practically bouncing in her chair. Is that a proposal? Chloe asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. It's a proposal to propose, Lucas replied with a grin. I figured I should check with the other members of the family first, make sure everyone was on board with the plan. I'm on board, Arya announced immediately. Can I help pick the ring? What about you, Stella? Chloe asked, turning to the baby, who was watching them all with bright, curious eyes. What do you think? Stella babbled something that sounded remarkably like approval, then threw her spoon on the floor with the satisfied air of someone who'd just voted. Well, Chloe said, looking around at the three people who'd somehow become her entire world. I think that's unanimous. Lucas leaned across the table and kissed her, soft and sure and full of promises about the future they were going to build together. Around them, their chosen family celebrated in the way that mattered most, with laughter and sticky hands, and the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. Later, as they sat on the front porch watching for shooting stars that might or might not appear, Chloe thought about the long road that had brought them here. The rain and the grief and the moments when everything had seemed impossible. The phone calls and legal battles and sleepless nights when love had felt like the only thing standing between them and complete collapse. Any regrets? Lucas asked quietly, Stella sleeping peacefully in his arms while Arya pointed out constellations. With the confident authority of someone who'd been studying the night sky for weeks. Just one, Chloe replied. What's that? I wish Peyton could see this. See Stella growing up surrounded by people who love her. See that her baby girl is going to have the kind of family she always wanted her to have. Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then, maybe she can. A streak of light flashed across the sky, not quite a shooting star, but close enough to count. Arya gasped and squeezed her eyes shut, making her wish with the fierce concentration of someone who believed in magic die in her arms. Stella stirred. Slightly, but didn't wake. Safe in the knowledge that the world was full of people who would catch her if she fell. And Chloe Warren, who had learned that home wasn't a place, but a choice you made every day, watched the stars appear one by one and knew that some stories didn't end. They just kept beginning, over and over again, with every sunrise and every shared meal and every moment when love decided to show up disguised as an ordinary Tuesday. Thank you, she whispered to the night sky, to Peyton, to the universe that had somehow conspired to give her everything she'd never known she wanted. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, it almost sounded like laughter. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments below and tell us, what's the most unexpected way someone has changed your life? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the beautiful, messy, impossible ways we find each other in this world, because sometimes the best families are the ones that choose each other, one rainy night at a time.